Hello and welcome back. Sean here, Mountains Garage, on a warm, sunny afternoon, Monday afternoon. I have a few minutes to kill before the school bus gets here, and I dug out my oil pumps, preparing them to install into my 377 and 421 cubic inch small block Chevys I've been working on in the last few videos and will be in the next few videos, I'm sure. These are really nice pumps. It's the Melling 10 555s. One was still wrapped in the package. The other one looks like at one point it had a push-in pickup tack welded on or welded on to the cover and then cut off so that it was all kind of grooved and messed up. And I really impressed myself. I was able to level that up in the mill and cut it off. And if I handed you that, you'd probably think it was made that way. So this made my day right here. I smoothed it all up, cleaned it all up, good to go. I like to take my pumps apart just to make sure there's nothing in there. Although there's no room, if there was any debris in the pump, it won't turn. If I dropped a piece of dirt in there, you'd feel it. The Melling's 1055 pump, they have quite a few. If you go on their website, they'll explain all the differences. This has the 3/4 hole like the big blocks have. Back in the day, putting a big block pump in a small block was a thing. So you can run a 3/4 press in, or Melling sells quite a few different pickups for different depth pans that bolt on. They have a gasket and bolts, and that is good to go, secure. It's a beautiful piece, not that expensive, 20, 30 bucks. In high performance world, that's cheap. And this one here is all ready to go. I say it's set for 8 inches. The pan that I have is 8.5. They say to run 3/8 to a 1/2 inch off the bottom of the pan to give you suction clearance. So that should be good to go. They come with 2 springs. One is 70 pounds, and the other one's 40. I'm going to run the 70-pound spring in both of them. And lastly, we got to unpack the fact that these are high-volume pumps. I know what you're thinking. Your grandmother once told you, you can't put a high volume pump in a Chevy motor. You'll pump the pan dry and oil will squirt right out of the valve covers. Instant death to your motor if you put in a high volume pump. Well, that's just not true. Science doesn't back it up. Your high volume pumps come in either 10% or 25% more capacity output per revolution than your stock ones because the gear is that much bigger. It's longer this way. So every turn, it has the ability to pump more. We could talk for hours about pressure and volume, which interestingly enough, anybody that tells you to not run a high volume pump, the next thing they're going to tell you is to put the high pressure spring in your stock volume pump. So if you want to study pressure and volume and what that means, you've just done the same thing to your stock pump. You've asked for it to put out more. Now an engine is nothing but a constant leak. It's not like a hydraulic system where you're deadheading it and making it do work. All the clearances in your engine, that's why you measure everything, is nothing but a leak. So any one of those leaks gets too big, you lose your oil pressure once you go beyond the capacity of the pump. A high volume pump is good for me because the 377, I have 2.1 and 2.5 thousandths. That's the rods and mains bearing clearance, and that's not tight. It's not unacceptably loose, but it's in the range where a high volume pump would be suitable. If you have an oil cooler or something you're pumping oil out and back, or any increased oil demand, a high volume pump checks that box. If you're racing, that's a pretty vague one. A high volume pump is recommended if you go to any oil pump manufacturer's website. Now I must say the stock Chevy oil pump is quite a unit. I serviced, excuse me, Chevrolet police cars. We had Chevrolets for probably the first 10 years I worked at the municipality. Never once did we even have a valve cover off one of those engines. And you can't think of a more abusive environment than a police car. That thing is hammered from the first night it goes on patrol. It's left idling for hours on end, high-speed pursuit, running shift after shift. They had some cars, they'd never shut them off, other than for oil changes. And they would be hot engine, 15 pounds at idle, 40 pounds going down the road. hundreds of thousands of miles, never a problem. The stock oil pump is a pretty stout unit, and if I had one, I'm sure I could put it in both of these engines and probably not have a problem. I don't have a huge capacity of oil or really the need for the high volume except for my bearing clearance. I do check that box, and I might do some racing. So do not adjust your set. Yes, it's later, darker. I'm now wearing a sweatshirt. The 421, the bearing clearance in that, which we documented in yesterday's video, is 4 thousandths on the mains. So that is potentially more of a leak. Clevite says it's okay. It's not even at their maximum spec of 4.5. So in the interest of science and the fact that I already have those bearings, I'm going to assemble. That whole engine is a science experiment anyway, why not? So the whole theory that it's going to pump the pan dry, you would have to have a much bigger leak inside the engine than that. Because when the pump comes up to pressure and regulates itself, it goes over relief and the oil goes back in the pan, not too far from where it's sucking. It doesn't just pump everything it has through the engine. If it was able to do that, you'd have to have a pretty big hole somewhere. So that's all we got to say about that. I'm going to run them, and you can make your own decisions based on everybody else's opinion and your own. To drive this one, I have a Moroso solid shaft. The other Melling pump came with a shaft, which is really cool. These are expensive pumps. They're $150 or more, plus the pickup. But they do come with a shaft. These shafts will set you back $10, $20 depending on what kind of deal you get. So this one will get this shaft. The pump itself comes with a special wrench, short enough to clear the pickup when you tighten it up, which is cool. Again, it comes with 2 springs. In this case, I'm going to have an extra gasket, which is never a bad thing if I have to service it or take the pump back off, the pickup back off the pump. More important than worrying about whether you have a high pressure, high volume, standard pressure, high volume, standard volume, high pressure pump, whatever, of more concern is how you're driving the pump. If you have, these are both roller camshafts, if you have a steel billet, you need, at minimum, a brass distributed drive gear, which is also turning the pump. So if this is causing a lot of load, which they claim these don't, but the load is still placed on the brass gear. If you have a cast core cam, which this is the one going in the 377, it doesn't require anything special. You can use a standard distributed gear and a standard fuel pump push rod. This one requires a brass tipped or a polymer fuel pump push rod, composite, and again, at minimum, a brass distributed drive gear. Next step up from that, we're up to $100 already, but that is a melanized gear. And beyond that is the composite one. So for this one, I think I'm going to shop up a composite. The brass are okay. I don't know how long they're going to last. In fact, I may revisit that thought. Your distributed drive gears typically come in 0.491 or 0.500 diameter shafts, so you got to know that. That seems to be the 2 common ones. But it's a whole package. I mean, you cannot think driving the oil pump without thinking about the camshaft. So the later pumps, you can buy this pump has straight gears, you saw them. At high RPM, they claim it has a potential to pulse, which could affect your spark delivery. And cavitation, they sell an anti-cavitating pump, which means they cut extra grooves in the bottom cover. I actually used to do that. I have a guy do it for me. Not knowing any better, I read it in a magazine. Seemed like the thing to do, but they warn you that you should be racing only because at idle you could have lower oil pressure than you expect. So if you're going to do a lot of idling, which a street vehicle you're going to, I don't know if you can see this, I'm maybe blocking it by the camshaft, but so the anti-cavitation pump in this same part number would be 10555C, and this is just a straight 10555. Woo! Been a long day. Melling now makes a helical cut pump I think it's called a shock tooth pump, that supposedly takes care of a lot of the higher RPM spark influencing chatter or pulsing. They claim it's easy to turn. You know, it's the latest and greatest thing. I don't have those. I'll run the traditional straight teeth and probably never know the difference. But if I was shopping for a new one, it would maybe be a consideration. Installed on the engine, I used an ARP stud and nut. A couple reasons. One, it's inexpensive. Two, it's easier to find than the correct bolt. And I did measure the thread depth on the main cap to make sure that the stud would not contact the backside of the main bearing, because we wouldn't want that to happen. And it didn't. Plenty of room, so you just put it in by hand, put a little oil on the washer and the nut, and torque it up. Don't be surprised when the dry shaft falls off the pump. Right now it's stuck on there with a little bit of Vaseline, but in this position it can drop down. But when you flip the engine over, you can put it right back where it belongs with a screwdriver. When you put the engine back over for the last time anyway, be sure to remember to use a screwdriver and make sure it's all the way engaged in the pump. The last thing on the list tonight is to clean up, lube up, and slide the used CompCam Extreme Energy retrofit hydraulic roller camshaft into the 377. They call them retrofit when you're putting a hydraulic roller into a non-roller block. In my case, both of my blocks are in the 70s. The 377 is the 1976 block hydraulic roller camshafts. I don't know if they existed or not then. But it's 540, 560 lift, 290 and 300 duration. That's intake and exhaust. Should be pretty healthy sounding, I hope. Time will tell. That's it for tonight. Have a great night, and I'll talk to you in a couple days.